My name is Jerry France, and I manage the services and investing teams at JumpStart, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to our next session about strategic money, finding the right investors. We're very fortunate in this region to have a number of sources of capital, many of which are supported through the Ohio Third Frontier Pre-Seed Program, which supports JumpStart and its 3 funds. But despite the wide range of funding sources, raising money is tough. It's hard to find dollars, and it's important to understand that if you're looking for dollars, how do you align what the company is looking for with what the investor wants? And then more importantly, it's about the relationship. It's more than just the money. So to navigate us through those topics, we're really pleased today to have as our moderator Professor Scott Shane, there on the far end. Scott is the Professor of Entrepreneurial Studies and Economics at Case Western Reserve University. And we are also pleased to be working with him later this year on the first annual Morgenthaler Pavey Startup Competition for Case grads and Case students, which a great program that honors the legacy of David Morgenthaler, the iconic venture capitalist who was a great friend and advisor to JumpStart. In addition to his work, Scott is also a noted author and thought leader, and the perfect person to introduce our team here of panelists and walk us through. So that sets the stage. Now it's my turn to turn it over to Scott, and please give him a warm welcome.
Well, thanks all for coming here. We're going to try to make this an interesting and interactive session. What I'm going to do is first actually have each of the panelists introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their perspective, since going to my right, Kate is an entrepreneur, so she's going to be looking at this whole perspective a little bit differently than the other panelists, but then each panelist is different in the way in which they invest in startups. We have a VC, angels on the panel, and so talking a little bit about what they do for 30 seconds or so in terms of those investments. Then we'll go and go in. I have a couple questions prepared, but I know that audiences tend to like to ask the questions that the audience has. So after we do maybe 1 or 2 of the questions that I have, I'll turn it over to the audience. I'm going to have to go like this every time. People are going to start asking questions because otherwise I can't see out there. But when we see people come up to the mics, ask questions, we'll go through them on the panel. If we run out of questions from the audience, by the way, I've never seen that, but if it happens, I have some backup questions to ask. So first I'm going to turn it over and have, going to my right, the panelists introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, my name is Kate Volzer. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Wisr. Our company helps students connect with alumni for advice related to careers, transitions after college, and also allows alumni to connect with each other. We are venture-backed, JumpStart, North Coast Angel Fund, fund out of Chicago called Investor Ventures, and then we have a group of kind of local angels, some coastal angels, and then one cohort of very successful female executives here that put into an LLC. And we're 18 months old, if I didn't say that.
Hi, I'm Bill Trainor, co-founder of Mutual Capital Partners. We are a growth stage and somewhat early stage investor, opportunistically. We invest in business-to-business software, med devices, and have been doing so since 2004.
I'm Janet Makepeace. I'm both an entrepreneur and an investor. After a 20-year experience in healthcare at executive level within pharma. So my company is JAR Leadership Coaching, where I help leaders, teams, organizations be more successful. And I'm also a member of Pipeline Angels. It's an all-women's group with over 200 members across the United States. And we invest in women entrepreneurs.
Okay, and I'm Rem Harris with JumpStart. JumpStart, I think most people are familiar with. We've been in Northeast Ohio making seed investments since 2004. I've been with the organization for the past 10 years. Today we manage 3 funds. We have 2 seed funds, the Evergreen Fund, which is the fund that is most well known among the Northeast Ohio region. That's making $500,000 to $250,000 or back that up, $250,000 to $500,000 investments into seed stage businesses in Northeast Ohio. The second fund is the Focus Fund, which is similar to the Evergreen Fund, doing $250,000 to $500,000 seed rounds into diverse-led companies across the state of Ohio. And then our third fund is the JumpStart Next Fund, which is doing a little bit later stage investments, $500,000 to $1 million check sizes, typically at a Series A, late seed, Series A type financing rounds.
Great. Well, so when Jerry introduced me, he talked about my day job. My sideline job is that I am a very early stage angel investor. I invest at the pre-seed stage, largely in companies just entering accelerators or trying to achieve product market fit, that kind of stage, primarily B2B software companies, and which will become relevant here as I push this discussion out. I won't do anything biomedical related, which will help us lead to the discussion of some of the differences later between the ways in which different kinds of investors might add value. So let me start out with the first question for the panel, and we'll just go again to my right to answer this, which is a really straightforward question. What is the one thing you could name that you think investors do that adds the most value to startup companies?
From the CEO's perspective, our investors generally have invested in other companies, and they have the benefit of having seen some of those companies do well or not do well. And so hearing kind of those stories and not allowing us to repeat the same mistakes is, I think, the most helpful, that kind of advice.
Experiences are always a great thing, but we're big believers that you can write large checks into a company, but if you can bring customers to the table as well, that helps lever your dollars and make a business not need to go back out into the capital markets sooner. So we won't invest if we don't think we can bring a handful or more of customers to the table.
I think beyond the financial capital, especially when you're looking at early investment, also the human and social capital and the connections that you can make, the experience that you have, the support that you can provide. I know especially with the women that we work with in Pipeline Angels, that's invaluable. And to just give them a financial contribution wouldn't be enough to really help them, get going.
So the comments are all sounding very consistent. Startups are an exercise with a tremendous amount of great uncertainty around them. So every early stage company has many, many challenges to achieve or to work through, a lot of hypotheses to test out and validate, and connecting those dots or working through those challenges as quickly as possible is essential to becoming successful. As an investor in the region, we've invested in more than 100 companies to date. Part of the experience that JumpStart would bring is just understanding how to navigate the early stage challenges that companies would most commonly face is half the battle. So we're a little bit unusual in that we have a large team, both on the investing side and then on the post-investment side with venture partners that work with our portfolio companies. Our venture partners are all operators that have many of the scars from living the startup lives, that startup life themselves. And it is essential to figuring out how to connect the dots and work through the early stage challenges as quickly as possible.
So I'll just add one that the panel didn't, the rest of the panel didn't mention, and that's probably what I would say I spend 80% of my time doing when I invest, which is finding other investors to introduce the startup to, because as an early stage angel, my $25,000 check is not going to last a company very long, and if the company needs to raise a $500,000 round or a $750,000 round, they're going to need other people, and in many cases, that's a really important value add early, is how to help put together that early kind of round for a startup. Okay, I'm going to do one more question here, and then we'll go get some questions from the audience. I want to flip this around and look at the opposite side, which is what's the one thing you can name that investors do that is the most problematic or destructive to startup companies. I'm sure we've all seen it. Probably none of the investors on the panel have ever done this themselves, but I'm sure they've seen somebody who has. But what's the one thing you would mention?
We've been fortunate to not run into this, but I have observed it. I think that sometimes investors can lack the patience to let the early stage startups figure out, what a real sales cycle looks like, and can push a company into spending too much money too quickly and fully going to market before they're actually ready, which can be damaging to the company's reputation in the long term. So,
We're perfect, so. This isn't something we've done, but something we've been involved with, unfortunately, 3 times now. And investors invest out of funds. These funds are 10-year cycles. About halfway through, they're investing new funds, and the cycle of a fund is very challenging. And what we've seen a number of times is, as funds are approaching different cycle times, especially as their funds are moving along, they will push for exits sooner than what is appropriate for the portfolio companies and for the entrepreneurs in general. And it's an interesting corollary, because so much of the value of a startup business is realized on, that's my fan club president back there, my 1-year-old. Sorry about that. So much value is realized at the back end of an exit, where you're building this foundation of the team and the technology and the board and everything else. When you sell too early, as the business is just coming up the value inflection curve, you leave so many dollars on the table. And so a fund that once out can put a lot of undue pressure at the board level, at the investor level. They just start saying things and pushing the direction of the business toward an exit. And it's very unfortunate, because sticking these things out to the ultimate end is when you make the maximum return on your investments.
Well, again, I'm new at this, but one thing that I think could be quite harmful is making an assumption. So we're talking about providing more than just financial capital, and when you go in and don't ask the right questions, open to hear what's going on, and make assumptions about what needs to be done, I think it can be a real barrier for the investor and for the entrepreneur. But I think on the other side of that too, it's important as an entrepreneur to know what you need, because that's a good marriage between an investor if they can help you kind of fill that gap in what you need. So I guess assumptions that aren't grounded would be something that I think could be detrimental.
So, Janet, I love that you use the word marriage, because I frequently will describe an investor and founder relationship like a marriage, but I'll also say that unlike a marriage, which you can get a divorce from, it's very hard to separate an investor and portfolio company relationship. So it's important to recognize that these are long-term relationships. And to the earlier comments of the prior question, that Scott had for us, how do you add value? It's really important to understand from an investor perspective or a founder perspective how your investors create value. A great example is I sit in a lot of board meetings. Founders are basically putting together, CEOs are putting together board decks, reporting out to their investors. Oftentimes that's a one-way conversation. So the thing that I see often that is, I'd say, not intentionally done, but unintentionally done by investors is listen to updates without providing any meaningful feedback. And this is where investors really can and should play an important role. And the most important and most fruitful discussions among investors and portfolio company leaders, whether in a formal board discussion or outside of that, is really challenging the assumptions, challenging the progress, and really understanding what companies are accomplishing. The lack of that really impedes a company's ability to progress as quickly as it needs to accomplish important milestones and help that company progress from maybe a JumpStart stage investment to a mutual capital stage investment.
I guess I would add a couple things and then I'll ask for questions from the audience. So I've noticed a couple of them. One is that there are investors who put in terms in deals that would benefit the investor at the expense of the founder. And I have found that what you see later is that this will cause all kinds of bad incentives where the company might benefit from an exit, but the founder might choose not to do it because you've created a differential incentives between the different parties. That's one. A second one is very nervous investors where they pester the founders about what's happening with their money. 6 months after they've put the money in the company, and really it's very unlikely you're going to see any results for quite some time if people are not comfortable with making the kinds of investments. They shouldn't do it, but this is, I found, a very destructive behavior of taking a lot of founders' time on things that are not beneficial for the company. Okay, are there some questions out there? Yeah.
So I'm a technology and innovation consultant, and one of the things I've seen is that the money part is like candy. And it's very easy when you have a little bit of money in a startup to hide a lot of problems by throwing some money at it. And I've seen companies fail because they don't have the other infrastructure background to pull this off. And you two were sort of dancing around that. I think I'd like to hear more about what it takes to make the money successful.
Who's the you two? We can't see anything.
Yeah, we can't
We can't see anything. It's like we're under interrogation lights here.
Yeah.
What do you want?
Who are you asking the question?
The panel, I thought.
Okay, all right. Well, any of you can take it.
You want to?
Go ahead.
You want me to start? Okay, I'll go ahead and I'll take a shot at that. So, so the question is, how do you make the money last, or probably more importantly, how do you direct it towards the most important priorities for a company? Is that right?
No, I think we're talking about what skills it takes and what bridges it takes to make that money work.
So,
And it's not the product.
so how do you use your capital effectively? Okay, so I think so we tend to think of it as what important milestones will the capital allow the company to accomplish? And a milestone is, or collectively a series of milestones are events that once a company completes them create some higher value for the company. Usually de-risking the opportunity and making it more attractive to the next money in. As an example, if you're a software company and you have no customers, but you have a functional product, acquiring customers is an important milestone to demonstrating that the value of the technology and the ability to reach a market and support that market so that they continue to use your product and derive benefit from it. In other sectors, life sciences, so if you're talking about medical devices, going through a clinical and regulatory pathway can help validate those technologies. This is where experience becomes relevant. So an entrepreneur who's not been through this process before may have many ideas about what they could do that creates value, but may not have the optimal idea of what to do to create value. Investors that have been through this process a number of times, and in our process at JumpStart, we work closely with the entrepreneurs to figure out, well, given where you are today, what are the most important things for you to accomplish over the next 12 to 18 months? And do you have enough capital to complete these activities? Once we build out the plan, we mutually agree upon the plan. It's a process of managing progress against those milestones, and you achieve them incrementally. And we look at dashboards to monitor the progress and decide, are we on track? Are we off track? Have we learned anything new that would cause us to change our opinion on the things that we've agreed that we would do? And these changes are not unusual because, as I said earlier, there's a lot of uncertainty, and most companies are testing hypotheses and gathering data and evolving their perspective on the market potential, on the product feature set potentially, and many other aspects of their business. So using the money effectively is about understanding what are the top priorities and how to progress through those priorities and how to measure your performance and progress against those goals.
With that being said, though, I mean, venture capital is about risk. And we've never hired a VP of sales that just came in and dramatically changed the business, and it worked all the time. About half the time it does, the other half it doesn't. We'll bring in a new CTO. Oh, the prior code was crap, that was terrible. Or a new chief engineering officer, med device business, you completely need to redo this and this and this. Big companies are allowed to fail because the law of small numbers affects the startup businesses. You have one bad hire and you've raised $500,000, you feel the pain in a huge, huge way. You've got 25 million of revenue, you don't feel the pain as much. I mean, your progress slows down, but you're not back out trying to raise capital again. And so the best thing I can tell entrepreneurs is that you just need to surround yourself with people that will give constructive feedback, that will work with you hand in hand, that have been there and done that before as an entrepreneur. You know, get good people that want to help you and run ideas and things by them, because your dollars are so precious at the early stage. And that's not to say that they're not precious later on. They're just percentage-wise less precious.
My add to that, I mean, I think you guys have kind of said the things that I probably would have said, but one of the scariest things about starting a company is getting comfortable with the fact that somewhere along the way you're probably going to mess something up, and not feeling comfortable communicating kind of those bumps in the roads or snafus to your board. It's not going to work out. You have to be ready to communicate right away. There's a difference between your board and your investors. Being transparent, and we try very hard to be transparent and consistent to the right level with our investors. We're totally transparent to our board. So what's kind of scary about your question is it sounds like you may have been in a situation where your founders are just not being open and honest, and maybe it's kind of say, hey, I'm not going to like scream at you if you totally mess up. Here's how kind of to right the ship.
So let me add one thing, and it returns to a comment that Kate made in the very beginning about investors pushing companies to develop too quickly. There is an ordering to the process, right? You're not going to scale the sales organization before you have product market fit on a company. And lots of times when you're really early and somebody's got this, they've got a product, it's working, they've tested their hypotheses with 4 or 5 customers. Those 4 or 5 customers are all in different verticals. You don't know which vertical is the one you should really go after yet. I mean, it may be that you don't want to start turning on the money spigot and hiring and doing other things. And there can be a problem. Sometimes this is the founder being inexperienced and wanting to do that. Sometimes it's the investors being inexperienced and pushing and saying, well, when I was an investor in such and such a company, when they invested at a later stage and the company already had product market fit, pushing the company too much too quickly. So that's another area.
It could also be a product of the investment vehicle. So I know we have a convertible note that was 24 months, and so there's a clock ticking against that. So.
Let me just follow up. From what I'm hearing, you're responding to a company of a larger scale than a lot of people in this room might be interested in. So 1 or 2 or 3 people don't have that infrastructure. So there's a backbone of skills or support recognition they need to know to keep them from using the money to solve a problem when money won't solve it.
Yeah, and I guess my thought on that would just be not every company should take money either. I mean, I don't know the calculus of what you're trying to lay out there, but if you have 3 people and you're just trying to build more of a lifestyle business, that's probably not a good business to try and bring outside money into, because outside money is looking for a return commensurate with the risk that they're taking in the situation. Again, happy to talk offline, any of us are, with you to get more specific on that, but appreciate the question.
There's a question over there.
Yes. My question, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, I'm going to do a little bit of a fast forward on a situation and get your expert valued advice. It's a current environment question. I represent a medical concern from UK, spinal technology, ready. They've been developing it. We're ready for some late angel investor, possibly first round. The issue that I have is, what is the current environment as you see it for me to be able to raise funds in the U.S. given the Brexit uncertainty? In a UK company, they have certain discounts from the federal government or their government for investment protection, etc. But any thoughts on whether or not it's the current environment is good, for example, here in Cleveland to find investment money, or are there certain hurdles because of Brexit and the uncertainty surrounding it?
Is this an approved device in the UK?
They're in the process both on CE and going to FDA here. That's part of where we are in the cycle. We've done the proof concept, and I'm ready to go to the next step, which is the goal to raise some money. It's about $1.5 million at this point, just to give you an idea.
I can't speak to the region. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., so these folks can probably speak to that, but I'm pretty well versed in healthcare. And for me, Brexit wouldn't be a huge consideration for investment. It would be more around the product, the ability to get approved through the regulatory authorities, both in the U.S. and ex-U.S. I think, personally investing in a product that gets approved through the FDA is quite attractive because the market's just a lot bigger here. So I'm not sure Brexit would hold me back from being interested in a successful company with a team that's strong too. I don't know what your team profile is, but that I look at the team as much as I look at a good product.
I think, here in Northeast Ohio, you've got a couple of different considerations. Number one, where is the business going to be domiciled? Who's running the test, where are the tests being done, what's going to be the cost of the test? Even before you get into that, trying to understand the differentiating factors of the technology, because there's only been about 8,000 spine companies in the last 20 years, because it is the highest reimbursement area for orthopedics. So, there's a myriad of different factors, but it's a good area for investment. But generally speaking, angel is local. And so if you're trying to raise money to, build a UK business, people don't care about Brexit. They don't, there's a value of a business based on, what the potential market opportunity is, the price point in that market opportunity, the reimbursement. That all requires FDA approval, which is a very long and arduous task. Even if you have predicate information you can base it off of, you're probably still going to have to do, PIM trials, and, that it takes a ton of money for that. And that's the other major inhibitor to angel in general, is just the amount of money it's going to take to get through those trials to actually prove if you really have something truly unique. But again, we can talk offline there, and they perhaps have some other opportunity or ideas here. But I think you really have to have here's what we are. We're a Cleveland, Ohio business. We're partnered with UH or the Cleveland Clinic, and this is the trial process we're going to go through, and maybe you have all that also.
Sure, just to add one other piece of information. It's a spinal endoscopy, and it's got a really strong team, and they are looking, part of the reason they looked to me was to try to base it in Northeast Ohio with partners like UH or Innovation Center, BioEnterprise, et cetera, on that. And they're actually 510Ks where they're headed, so that's a better route than the original device, if you will. Thank you.
Are there questions from the audience right now? Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Virgil Collins. I have a company called Vercover Line Industries Corp. And I want to follow up on the question about the healthcare issue in the product development. We've been developing a product for the last 3 years, and we've got it to the point of where we're ready to release the product. And we've personally invested about $130,000 in getting to this point. So now we're ready to release the product, and now we find that we put certain names or certain words in it concerning healthcare. Now under the regulatory requirements. The FDA wants to get involved and says, well, we got to get a 510K pre-approval before we can release the products. We have about 30,000 products in the warehouse ready to release, and now we're stuck. My question is, as an investor, right, when I was in a hospital, raised $30,000 to get the FDA approval. So my question is, when you go into an investor, are you looking for the product to already be FDA approved before you would get involved? Is it more appetizing to you when it's approved, or if you look at the product on the merits of the product? The reason I'm asking this is that in our now stage that we're in, I've actually sent an application to Shark Tank. Okay, so it looks like we have a possibility of appearing on Shark Tank. And I'm wondering now, well, when they find out that it's not FDA approved, is it really worth going on Shark Tank to show the product for the possibility of investment, or is it more worth the actual going on the Shark Tank TV show for the advertisement? If you don't get the actual investment, the advertisement, they tell me that you can really make out the fact that now you got free marketing worldwide. So which is it? I mean, should we go after the investment before we get to FDA approval? After we get the FDA approval? Should I go on Shark Tank knowing that we still have to go through this process, hoping that we'll generate enough interest in the product in order to get the FDA approval?
Can I ask what type of healthcare product it is?
Well, we have a line of products, but the one we're going on Shark Tank with is called a fitness kit. It's a fitness kit for women primarily that we call protect your skin while at the gym. And what it does is prevent you from having to wipe down the equipment before you use the equipment. You now have a means to what you're always protected as you're working out.
So it's a consumer good?
Yes.
Okay, it's a consumer good. So not a...
Why does it need FDA approval?
Yeah.
Is it a
because
claim
we
you're trying to
mentioned
make?
it'll prevent you from getting colds and flus. Soon as we mention colds and flus.
You want to be able to make a claim. Opinion, it's a consumer good, and I'm not sure I'd wait around for FDA approval before I looked for investment. Be different if it was a molecule, a compound. I mean, you have to take that through FDA approval and have the appropriate clinical trials. But if you're really trying to get your company and your products out there, I guess my gut would tell me to move forward. But
Yeah, and I would suggest just doing some research in the drugstore or whatever else online. See what the FTC will slam you down if you have language that isn't proven by some sort of clinical data that is then accepted by the FDA. But most of the hand wipes and things like that, they don't go through that process. Eventually they do, but they don't start out that way. So if you can package your information such that you say, instead of, doesn't cure the common cold, but may do whatever language you have to use to avoid that pitfall, I would do that, because you're probably, to say something like this cures the cold or eliminates the cold, you're going to have to do a substantial study on that. There's no way 30K is going to get that job done.
Well, our language is being proactive. We just talked that it's been proactive. You actually use it to prevent picking up diseases or colds or flus. And I had long, extensive conversation with the FDA. And because it's a kit form, they were kind of struggling between whether or not it's called, a combination product. Then they start taking through all these things in which they want to say that, well, you have to get it through drug testing or through this. I said, well, it's all just a prevention. It's not taken internally.
And I guess one of the things that might be beneficial for you to do if you haven't already done it, find out the value of being able to make that claim. You know, what's the value of making that claim? It may not be as great as you think in your head, and I think finding that out from, you know, experts and your you know, general consumer is an important thing to do, because it might not be, you know, a great ROI to invest all of this money into getting this claim when you could potentially, you know, be highly successful without having that claim.
And I'd go on Shark Tank and sell to
Yeah.
Mr. Wonderful and have a picture
I
of his
agree.
face on the box and say, Mr. Wonderful won't work out without these. And that's probably more valuable than anything else. So
So you
good.
say probably go on Shark Tank anyway with, you know, with the, even though.
They're smart people. If they give you money, they're going to help you figure out a path to the market.
Question? Yeah. Thank you.
My name is Yan Haidu. I'm a professor at Kent State, but I have a spin-off company called Yanhai Power. We did NASA SBR phase 1 and phase 2. This topic is very attractive. We want to know how to move up. So this topic here says strategic money find the right investors. So I want to know that in general, if some of you can summarize, what are the general roles of some sorts when we work with investors? How do we determine which investors fit our business? How do we say which one is right or not right? So don't go too specific, but in general, something that we can take home. When we talk to people, we know a lot of people there want to invest, but we want to know which one. How do we determine that person, that investor is right or not? Thank you.
So, happy to start this one. So, to the earlier comments about investor and founder relationships being like a marriage, this is a relationship business, and the relationships that work the best are those where there is good chemistry among the investors and the founders. Not just do you get along, but do you think you can work together for a long period of time? Does the investor bring some, so if I'm in your shoes, in addition to the capital, what value does my prospective investor bring to the business? Do they have specific domain expertise that's relevant? Do they have an incredible passion for this field of technology? Do they have, to Bill's earlier comment, do they have a list of customers that would be helpful? Can you manage this partnership in a way that can accelerate the growth of the company? I know that raising money is hard to do, and entrepreneurs that we talk to are always struggling with how do I get that first $50,000, $100,000, $500,000, or $1 million. So I get that that's really, really tough. When you look at the dollars and you have the ability to raise capital, the next question to ask is, are my objectives aligned with those of the investors? And do we think that we can build a productive relationship? So getting to know the people, understanding how they see the business growing, aligning your perspectives on the market potential, on the company's strategy for everything from go-to-market to fundraising are really fundamental. So I view it so much like a partnership that you really have to make sure that your objectives are in alignment. When you find a check writer who you feel you can work with and you have mutual alignment on objectives, I think you're in a great place.
Our investors play a lot of different roles. Our founding team is pretty honest with each other and what we're good at and what we're not so good at. I would say we're good at business development, but we have investors that are much better at business development and probably more experienced, well, certainly more experienced than we are. So we lean on our investors more heavily for things that we don't feel as confident about on our own. So that I think be honest with yourself and what you're good at, what you're not good at, and find people to help you become better and learn from them. And that would be a good investor if you have a bunch lining up. I mean, there are lots of ways to think about what's good or bad. It's just kind of what you need and being honest about what you need.
I would add also that my experience has been that founders don't ask enough questions of investors, right? So if you take this marriage analogy, I mean, how many of you would go ahead and get married without asking any questions about your prospective spouse's background? I doubt that many of you would do that, but many, many entrepreneurs would be willing to take money from somebody without asking any questions. So asking what other companies has the investor invested in? How did they see their role in working with that company? What kind of things do they think is the kind of value that they can provide? Where are they helpful and what do they not know? And even very specific things, like most investors who do this a bunch would have a profile that would describe themselves as an investor, what companies they've done, what kinds of investments they're looking for, and you could ask them for investors for their profile, and you could find out a little bit more about them. But the frequency with which people even ask on the investor side is really low, and you got to ask if you're going to try to figure it out.
Can I tag something on to that comment? Because I think it's highly relevant, and I was having this discussion the other day. You know, it's almost like an interview. I would recommend to people when, you know, you're interviewing for a new company to work for, it's not just the company interviewing you, you're interviewing the company too, and I think that relationship stands with investors and entrepreneurs too. So, you know, I coach especially a lot of women who are entrepreneurs, and the topic of kind of coming in and having that mindset of, oh, I really need this person's time and I really need them to invest in me, and going in already with that kind of mindset and assumption that I need them more than they need me. Well, investors also need you, and you have value. So I think, you know, trying to gain that mindset of your value too is important as you partner with people.
We will not make an investment if the entrepreneurs do not do background checks on us. It's absolutely critical, because it tells me that they just want the money. If this is how they view things, and I know they're not qualifying their sales leads, I know they're not qualifying the candidates that they're interviewing. I mean, it is very, 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 very critical. We've been burned in the past because we used to think, oh, wow, we've got this term sheet put together and we don't want anything to derail it and everything. No way. I mean, these things take a decade, if you're lucky, to get a great return out of them. So make sure everyone is aligned up front, make sure the expectations are there as well. And specifically to your point, I mean, the other thing, you mentioned strategic money, whether it's strategic or venture, or do your diligence on these entities to make sure that they're not just, you know, going along for a free ride on your research or getting a quick look at what's going on, to make sure that they're going down the right path as well. So, you know, if they've never invested in a startup technology or a licensed technology before, don't talk to them. You're not going to get over that hurdle, you know, with their business development and their CFO and treasury and board, et cetera. If they've never invested in a Midwest company, don't talk to them. They're not coming here. I mean, now, if it's a new fund and there's, you know, or entity and the partners from Cleveland, Ohio, and there are extenuating circumstances, but there are other opportunities to find capital and go out and source those opportunities.
They may come here, you just don't want to be the person to get them here because it's time consuming.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's very helpful advice. Thank you all.
So strategic money is clearly ideal if you can find that partner that you're looking for, but also sometimes you need money to keep that growth going up. So if you're in a position where you're looking for a strategic partner that's going to be the right investor, we don't always have that luxury of time, like if the overlap isn't at the right position. So thinking between our two options in that situation, if you have an investor that might not be the right strategic partner and might not be the perfect fit for long term, or like scaling back marketing and slowing down your growth in order to work on the company to get into a position where you're more attractive for that strategic money, which would you suggest is done? Having that investor that long-term might not be the right fit, but you get the money to keep that growth going, or slowing down that marketing and that sales growth in order to get into a position for a strategic partner later?
You kick the can down the curb either way. So, as long as on the strategic front, you know it going in, just make sure they don't have any unique features like right of first, offer, or right of first refusal, or board access, to the point where they have a board seat and they're actually seeing some of the strategic changes you're going to be making, and that they don't have a blocking right. Make sure that they don't have a time horizon on their investment, a put right, if you will, because you could start to go in a different direction, they don't like it, and they put the investment to you. And strategic money can be beneficial. It's best when it is combined with non-strategic money to keep the honest people honest, if you will. But taking, slowing things down, that can hurt you as well. Your enemy in venture or angel or anything is always time. Someone else is out there trying to figure out the same problem. Now, they may not address it the same way that you are, but they're going to figure out a way to address it. And if they get out there and they get way ahead of you because of that, you're just perpetually playing catch up.
So I've heard the phrase, take the money and run. So take the money and run, just don't give them control in the process to make sure that you're
something like that.
Get a good attorney.
Yes. See
yeah,
Jonathan Vinokur, Howard Bobrow.
Yeah, so you want to make sure, to Bill's point, you want to make sure that if you're taking money from a strategic investor, meaning somebody who has a strategic objective with your business idea or technology, that you are not giving them rights that will in some way negatively affect your ability to achieve the outcomes that you want, whether that's economic or otherwise. Many of the terms that you'll see in agreements unilaterally are not problematic, but collectively can be very problematic. Having limited familiarity with the agreements and not having the insight to think about it holistically can be a challenge. So getting an attorney that is really experienced with early stage technology businesses and also knows what your objectives for the business are is fundamental to that consideration process.
I would add a couple of other things here about reframing the way you think about the problem. So first of all, there are investors out there that will make large numbers of relatively small investments very quickly. I know because I'm an LP in one fund out of San Francisco that's making over 100 investments a year, $100,000 each in rounds of less than $500,000, right? And making this with a 14-day decision process. So it's possible to go and find investors that meet the criteria of having value add. They can do a lot of things for you and get them and find them quickly. It's about finding that match. Now, the caveat of this is they may not be down the street in Northeast Ohio. And it's true, the point that Bill made earlier, that people tend to invest much more locally. That's breaking down, though, and we're getting, with the rise of platforms online, growth of accelerators and other things, we're getting more and more of this at a distance. So one possibility is finding another investor. The second part about reframing this is, if you were, say, framed your problem as, I need to raise $2 million, right, to do X, you might think about, well, maybe I need to lower my burn and solve the product market fit problem first and raise $500,000 and get my runway that way, and that might be able to be done with the few strategic investors you have. Now, if you've got none, I mean, it's kind of like anything else. If there's no other alternative to running out of cash, probably taking cash is the best outcome to running out of it.
Thanks.
Hi. You guys are talking about finding the right investors. And if we've been doing a lot of bootstrapping, and doing everything on our own, and we're to a point where we need to find an investor and find a marriage, and we're looking for our first date. How do we do this? Is there like a Match.com or a Tinder or something like that?
That would be Rem. Rem.com.
Yeah, so we have a website, jumpstartinc.org/apply will get you to our application page. That will get you into our system, and someone will evaluate your application and kind of route you to the right destination. So we are looking at investments on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis. So, and there are other investors in the region that you should be aware of that are investing at the seed stage. So probably a little bit earlier than, not sure where you are, but if you're just thinking about raising first capital, you're probably thinking of a seed fund like a JumpStart, maybe like a North Coast Angel Fund. There are other angel funds across the state. They all are going to have websites. You would go on and apply, submit your application, get some feedback. Obviously, given our role in Northeast Ohio, we'd be happy to meet with you, talk about what you're doing, and then figure out what would be the right pathways for you to consider.
There's a group of Cleveland founders. It's a new thing. It's called Start in Cle. There's a monthly dinner. I'd be happy to connect you to that group. It's for founders only. So it's nice to have peers. Also, I'm going to tell my grandma Jean to back off because I didn't know I was already married.
Exactly.
This is recorded, Grandma. She's probably watching.
Let me add one point to that. So I would say, look, if you find anybody by Googling them, looking at people who are at Startup Scaleup, names that you found, and they invest in startups anywhere in this region, find somebody that you know that knows them and get an introduction. And frankly, if you can't get an introduction and you've tried multiple sources, then try a cold call, right? Because you're not going to raise any money from somebody by not finding a way to approach them. I mean, you have to do that. And to be honest, if you can get to cold call and sell an investor, that investor's going to be pretty positive on you because that's a kind of sales skill that people like to see when they're investing in companies.
So from the founder, we have the process, if you want to know what we did. We have an Excel list that we translated into a Trello board and had columns, much like you would have a sales pipeline. Primarily, we went and looked for individuals that we had connections to on LinkedIn, somehow through the fund, or someone could make an introduction for us. So a warm intro is always better than a cold call, just like sales. And you're going to hear no a lot, and just get used to hearing no, and keep asking, keep talking, keep pitching. Someone said it takes maybe 1 in every 20 asks. Our yield was a little bit better than that, luckily, but it was a very big volume. I mean, I think I have 100 outreaches to raise $900K over. It took us, 7 months or something like that. It's a process. Just be ready.
When I think when you're having those discussions, make sure to ask for other connections from those people that you're having discussions with too. Because they might not be able to help you, but they might know other people who might be interested, and it's just having the courage to get out there. And what you'll find is asking for advice and help. I think people are always willing to give you, that assistance. People like to be asked for advice.
So,
one more thought on that. So the other thing is, as you're talking to investors, and to Kate's point, you're going to hear no a lot. That's the nature of the business. Is to ask why. I mean, why don't you see this as a good fit for your capital, whoever that capital provider is, and get some insight, right? Don't know anything about your idea. It may be in a category that's not a fit for venture, right? Which means that you then look for other pathways to raise capital for the business. And that's not an opinion on the quality of the business, more just an alignment with the objectives of what a venture fund would hope to accomplish. So having a good understanding of the types of capital, how they align with your objectives, your type of technology, your plans for growth, your plans for even liquidity, are also essential to that process. You will talk to a lot of people. People are generally happy to give time, but I would always ask for, make sure you're getting the right insights out of those conversations. You know, why don't you see this as a good fit? What other types of capital might be relevant? Who are the people I ought to be talking to if it's not you?
So at the risk of embarrassing Kate, I'm going to tell the story of when I met Kate and the startup with Wisr, because they came to pitch me for money, and I went to my network and we gave a valuation that they thought was, Kate and her partner thought was too low, right? Turned us down for money. I made referrals to other investors, and then they raised money from other people at the valuation that they wanted. And I'm still sitting on a panel with Kate, no problems there. So I think that, you know, just use that. We even shook hands. There you go.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff Jones. Just a question based on a hypothetical for in whatever role you would like, but imagine that you're the mentor and a board member for a CEO with a great new company, and the CEO is writing their quarterly, you know, update letter to all of their investors and discloses to you as you're reviewing the letter about, you know, meeting plan, that in fact there's information that the CEO is in possession of that suggests not only are they going to fall behind plan, but that they're probably going to need to raise money that they didn't plan to raise. What is your advice to the CEO on how to handle that, both in terms of what the company needs to do and what you tell your investors?
We tell our companies as soon as you know something, get it out there. Investors don't expect you to be perfect, but they expect you to be honest and forthright, and they expect you to be a leader, and the CEO needs to step up and take ownership of whatever the situation is, and not just present a problem, but present some ideas on where they think a solution might be had. Now, with that being said, that's why you have a board to discuss those things, and you want feedback and you want involvement there, but definitely don't hide it. Get it out there as soon as possible.
Totally agree. You know, we know that things are not always going to go to plan. Rarely do things exceed plan, and we are regularly in a position where we're assessing the progress, understanding why we're behind plan, and then figuring out how we're going to fix or move beyond. It does come with new plans. And what do those plans look like, and why are we raising money, and what are the terms? Investors are, by nature, they are optimistic. You wouldn't be in this business if you were not optimistic. And therefore, when you support your team, you believe that you have an interesting market opportunity, you've got compelling technology, you continue to take additional swings to try and get over the next key milestone, and that can only happen if you have full information, you have a new plan that everybody supports, and you bring that opportunity back out to your investors and ask them to continue to support the company.
I would just add the statement about emphasizing the sooner by telling a sort of brief anecdote. You know, you've got to give investors information and give them time to actually be able to be helpful to you. So last year I had a company that about 2 days before Thanksgiving, right, said, oh, guess what? We're trying not to tell any of the investors this, but we have 4 weeks of cash left. They're like, okay, you have 4 weeks of cash left and it's about to be Thanksgiving. And you know, most investors are not around over Thanksgiving. They're not going to be around over Christmas. The ability to raise money at that time of year is going to be really hard. And you've now told me you have 4 weeks and it's going to happen by the end of the year. Probably it's going to be impossible to help. And that company is no longer around because that wasn't the case. Now, if that company had said, things aren't going well and we have 4 months of cash left and we're starting to get nervous, can you help us? We probably could have put together put in some more money, helped the company change direction. But by the founder waiting and not wanting to say and thinking they would just solve the problem and hope and pray, you get to the point where it is too late to solve it. So when there's a problem, if you You know, if you wanted money from those investors because those investors you thought could help, share the information and get the help sooner when they can still help.
Also, it takes about like 6 months to actually raise money. So if you think you're going to run out in 6 months, you should start raising yesterday.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, going back to that whole idea of not disclosing information, I mean, it's a scary thing. You really, I can only imagine. I mean, well, you know, I've had it. I've been an investor for 20 years now, and when things go poorly, you sure hate to tell your investors and everything else, but as soon as you know, get the information out there, tell them how you're working on everything else. With that being said, if you wait too long or you're trying to hide things, not only is it hard to raise money in a short period of time, but a CEO that is forthright and really, you know, has that good open relationship with the board and with the investors, the Thanksgiving to Christmas shutdown doesn't have to happen. There's money there from your investor group if they still believe in you. But if they don't believe in you, it doesn't matter how good the opportunity is, because we're all analyzing, you know, putting money into this company versus this company versus this company versus that. And if you give character issues a chance to rise up in a portfolio company, I'm putting my money elsewhere. You know, because there's no time to recruit a new leader for that business between Thanksgiving and when the company runs out of business. That's the hardest thing to do. The money, once you've got venture backing, it's a little easier to pull the money together. Character-wise, though, and finding a replacement to run that business, that takes a long time. And that's just something, you know, that's the risk any CEO takes when they take outside money. They're now a fiduciary steward to a board of directors and a group of shareholders. Even if that shareholder is just one, you know, you owe that shareholder the ability to put your best foot forward. And if you're not the right person to lead the business, you should work with them to find the right person to lead the business. I mean, just read the crap going on right now with Uber. I mean, what a what a train wreck.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm being shy. I just want to ask sort of a little bit of constructive criticism towards JumpStart. It's hard reaching you guys sometimes. Even with the website and the process that you have, sometimes it's hard getting a face-to-face to see someone, talk to someone, and realize what kind of relationship you could develop as an early stage business with a local company like JumpStart, for example. I'll give you an example, right? I've been trying to reach JumpStart with my own personal startup, ambitious sort of things that I do. I've had trouble reaching you guys, but I wrote a letter, cold call letter, to Techstars, to one of the board members in Techstars, David Cohen. He's one of the main players. He replied in 48 hours and invited me to Boulder and said, bring your startup, you've got something good, we want to look into this. Now, I can't afford to go to Boulder. You know, I'm not in that position right now personally. But at the same time, 48 hours after making a cold call pitch from an email, JumpStart doesn't get back to me.
So I appreciate the feedback and welcome it. So that shouldn't be the experience.
Yes.
The fact that you're sharing that is very helpful and great for us to hear, because we can't get better if we don't hear about the challenges.
We want to, as entrepreneurs who are here in Cleveland and in the Midwest, I suppose, we want to create great businesses here. We want our opportunities to stem from here. Silicon Valley or New York or these places should not be the end or be all, you know.
So we totally agree on that.
Yeah.
So happy to chat with you later. A little bit worried about putting the offer out there. Just send me an email because my inbox will be inundated by everybody who might be here and may want to reach me. But I'd be happy to talk to you. Why don't we catch up after this session? Love to hear a little bit more and make sure that you have a way to connect with me or someone on the investing team to have an initial conversation.
Sounds good.
Okay.
And you know, if I could just add one thing, I mean, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. We try to get back to everyone, you know, within a few business days. It is really hard. You get pulled into emergencies and this and that. I'm super guilty. I've got Rem in 3 of my companies, and I bother him so much. It just takes an inordinate amount of time, and so we're all looking to get better. You know, the Techstars thing, please don't view that as indicative of anything other than that's how they respond to every company that sends them stuff, because that they have an automated system set up, and we're all just trying to do different things. I mean, take a look at what's going on here, and the Key Bank initiative. I mean, we're in the nascent stages here, but I appreciate it. I mean, we want that same criticism ourselves.
I do realize there is a due process. I've sort of been a serial entrepreneur. I've had businesses overseas in the past, startups and things, and I've had to go through with investors and all that sort of process in the past. So I do understand it takes a lot of time, but you know, one of your panel mentioned before that it's a great idea sometimes to cold call, to reach out to somebody. And I was just giving you sort of some perspective on, you know, if even without a lot of collateral, you know, without a genuine pitch or without a demonstration or anything of that sort, entrepreneurs can still reach some fairly key people if their idea presents itself as something that has value or is lucrative enough to investigate. You know what I mean?
You've addressed a really good problem. I want to make sure that we have the opportunity for other people out there to ask questions. But you know, maybe this is that there's a real problem out there, and somebody should start a chatbot company here for us to fund to solve this very problem.
Thanks. So I've maybe 80% through a seed raise right now, and I've talked to maybe 70 different firms and have noticed a difference in priorities from investors in the Midwest versus New York and California. I was hoping to hear some insight as far as what you guys think about relation to both economics and valuation, and then the difference between the two on the coast, and then the value of having Midwest, you know, investors as opposed to, you know, saying, well, valuation is the most important thing and heading to kind of either coast. And how you guys think about the trade-offs between having local people that are here versus an entrepreneur kind of aspiring to make it kind of elsewhere as far as different terms in economics.
So I'll take a crack at this first. So there are regional differences, certainly driven by a number of factors. One is going to be the availability of capital. So on the coast, you have much larger funds than we have in the Midwest. And the other key factor, and meaning that they're chasing many more deals, they are bidding up deals on the coast. So I think over the past 12 to 18 months, I think we've seen some of those price valuations tempered a bit on the coast. Midwest has been very consistent in valuations. The other factors are going to be cost to run a business. So the cost to do many of the things that you would do in Silicon Valley is significantly less expensive here. The cost of real estate, the cost of talent is much more economical, meaning you can also accomplish a lot more with a smaller amount of capital in the Midwest. There are other terms that vary in the Midwest from the coasts. These are indirectly economic terms in many cases. And we are, at JumpStart, we're comfortable investing on West Coast terms. If West Coast VCs happen to be in a deal, that's unusual, very unusual to see at the seed round here. For, you know, I think the advice that I would provide anybody at your stage that's raising a seed financing is it's all about getting money into the company and building the partnerships that help grow the company. And that's the strength and the value that your investors bring to the table. I oftentimes will see entrepreneurs who are slow in the fundraising process. They are deliberating over, do I want so-and-so's money? Do I want these terms? And negotiating over a relatively small variance in valuation that really doesn't have large-scale impact on total ownership on either side of the equation for founders or for the investors coming in. Time is crucial. So the quicker you can raise, the quicker you can begin to advance your business, the better off you are. My advice would be to not get overly hung up on the terms. Certainly, I'm sure you can judge what's excessively punitive to your position and what you think is fair. But ultimately, agree on a valuation that you can live with, take the capital, and get your business started is what I would recommend.
The only thing I would add to that as a Midwest VC is that it's hard to compare apples and oranges. I mean, we've seen some coastal funds come in, they, very light terms, quick, everything else, and then when things don't go very well, they ghost. They are gone. Or when things go medium well, that's when the cram down round happens, and they end up, CEO change, complete recap of the business, and things like that. I mean, it's so hard to compare because every situation is so unique. I mean, when we make an investment, whatever amount that is, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, we reserve up to $6 million for that portfolio company. So I think a key question to ask is, what is the fund's plan for follow-on capital of in that business? And how much money do they have reserved? What stage are they in their fund? If you're $1 million in revenue company and you're in year 5, they're probably hoping for a quick exit, or they're gone because they're going to be on to the next fund, and then the next fund, and maybe even the next fund before you would exit. So there are just a bunch of considerations in there. But to Rem's point, I mean, if they give you good terms and you've done the diligence on them, you think they can add some value, take the money.
I think we have time for one more question if there is one. Let me just, I'm going to briefly ask the panel with a couple minutes left just to tell us a concrete step that they think as a founder should take for getting money from a value-added investor. What's a concrete thing you should do that? Start it with Rem.
Okay, what should an entrepreneur do? A concrete
step.
I would say get to know us early. Companies are always trying to raise money as quickly as possible. This is we tend not to see a company and write a check within a few days. That just doesn't happen. We like to understand the business. It takes time to connect the dots. It takes time to get to know the people, understand the business, the model, the technology, the why the buyers buy, why there's a need in the market, and we like to get to know the people and evaluate how they progress over time. So, concrete step is get to know investors. Don't expect them to write a check immediately. In most cases, you may find them occasionally, and build a relationship. It's all about, as my early comments were about relationship. This is a relationship business. Build relationships.
My recommendation would be know what you need. Be aware of what you need, and then also ask the right questions to those investors.
In part of getting to know these investors over time, put milestones out that are meaningful, and that when I say meaningful, they're meaningful from the perspective of, don't say we're going to have $1 million of revenue and it's June and you haven't sold a single thing. If you can do that, that's wonderful, but you're still a really good opportunity if you do 250,000 or 500,000 or even 100,000. It's make the milestones meaningful to you, express those to your investors, and then hit them. Act like a public company, even if you're a micro-private company, and that credibility will go so far. If you can point back to, here are the last 12 communications we did, and we hit 92% of our milestones, here's my money. I'll give it to you all day long, because no one puts out milestones that they're willing to hit. We hear about those milestones the first time when they're actually asking for capital, and then that's what takes a diligence process time. Because you're trying to figure out, are these real milestones, or are they just, pie in the sky, and who knows? And who knows is very different than some concrete wins that you can bank on, and investors like that predictability.
I think our relationship with JumpStart started back in probably April of 2016, so maybe a month after we were founded. And then a year ago at this Scale Up, they gave us a $25K check out of the Focus Fund. And then, I don't know, was it like 3 months ago, you guys wrote us maybe a $250K check? So, I mean, the relationships take time. So I think, center yourself and be prepared to be patient and diligent. In terms of doing your due diligence, and I should say JumpStart has also been our most responsive investor by far and helpful, so kudos to Rem and his squad. There, again, this like founder dinner, there's this whole new group, Start in Clee. I'm not like on, I just went to the dinner last week. There was an August one, and it was really nice to talk to people locally that are kind of in your shoes right now, and they also have stories of how they've interacted with the local investor base. So hearing it from them, referrals, testimonials, whatever you want to call it, is kind of, it's nice. Makes it a little more comfortable, and they can give you feedback. So outside of that, making your Excel list of knowing who your investors are, come to the dinner, talk to other people that are like you.
Thank you. All right, well, I think we're out of time. If we could give a round to the panel, great.